I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the conference room. One cup of coffee sat on the polished wooden table. Mine. No water, no notepad. No one else even bothered to pretend this was going to be a conversation. Just me, the new CFO, Logan Trent, who looked like he'd been AI generated from a LinkedIn hustle post, and a generic HR rep who looked like she'd rather be getting a root canal. Logan didn't sit down. He stood there in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, playing at power like a kid in his dad's shoes, flipping through papers that looked like they'd been printed hours before I even clocked in. "We're restructuring," he said, not looking up. "Your role has been deemed redundant." Then, with all the warmth of a traffic citation, he added, "Effective immediately. We ask that you not contact anyone internally or externally." That was it. 15 years. 15 years of 5 a.m. Vendor calls, 9 p.m. Spreadsheets, late-night contract edits, and coach flights to meet suppliers who didn't even speak English. I had built the vendor system from a duct-taped laptop and a filing cabinet I found in the basement. And now I was being erased, neatly, efficiently, like dragging a file to the recycle bin. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't even ask for a meeting with someone who actually knew what I did. I just gave him a calm little request. "Can you put that instruction about not contacting anyone in writing?" He smiled, clearly thinking I was asking for emotional closure. "Of course," he said, scribbling the line onto my termination letter like he was signing someone's yearbook. HR slid it across the table like it was a restaurant bill. They gave me 20 minutes to pack up. As I passed my old desk, I noticed my nameplate had already been removed, like I was a ghost they didn't want to admit they'd ever seen. I logged out of the system for the last time, thumb hovering over the trackpad, and thought about something I hadn't looked at in over 4 years. One tiny paragraph, buried deep inside a long-term supplier agreement. Something we called the Vendor Continuity Clause. It had been designed to protect us. Well, back when I was still considered part of us. Years ago, I had negotiated a safeguard into one of our biggest contracts. If I, Jenna Whitmore, by name, was removed as liaison without 30 days' notice, the supplier had the right to trigger a full termination settlement. That meant one big, fat final invoice for the remainder of the contract's value, a legal, "you break it, you bought it" clause. No one ever thought it would be used. It was theoretical, just legal padding. Until today. I walked out of that building like a woman with nothing left to lose, and a grenade already rolling down the hallway behind her. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't angry or gutted or embarrassed, but because I refused to give HR the satisfaction of writing "employee showed emotion" in my file. I could feel her eyes on my back, waiting for a meltdown. But I wasn't about to start sobbing into the cardboard box she handed me like it was a participation trophy for most disposable employee. I packed slow and deliberate, like I was cleaning out the garage after a divorce. Mug, USB drive. The tiny cactus Monica from Legal gave me 3 Christmases ago. It was mostly dead now, like the soul of that company. I left the branded water bottle and the sad stress ball shaped like a cloud. Let the next poor soul have them. My inbox was already locked. My Slack channels had vanished like I was a virus quarantined from the corporate bloodstream. 15 years scrubbed clean in under 15 minutes. Poof! Like I hadn't spent nights juggling suppliers across 3 time zones just to save this company from bleeding money over a mislabeled toner order. I shut down my laptop for the last time. No, "Are you sure you want to shut down?" Just black. But the whole time I was packing, I was counting. Not my belongings. Days. Days left on that vendor contract. Days until the clause I'd written, so quietly, so surgically, would wake up and do what it was designed to do. They thought I was just a spreadsheet gremlin with decent penmanship. What they didn't know was that I'd drafted that clause after a brutal incident years ago. A surprise staff cut had cost us an entire quarter's worth of pipeline, and I swore it would never happen again. So, I made sure it couldn't. The clause didn't say designated personnel or vendor management. It said me. Full legal name, written in Calibri size 10, buried in the vendor contract, approved by the very CFO who had just handed me my walking papers. As I walked through the lobby for the last time, HR trailing behind me like a nervous duckling, I wondered if she had any clue that my name wasn't just on a desk lease, but embedded in 6 figures of active contracts like a pressure switch. No one said goodbye. Not really. A few awkward glances. One coworker nodded slightly, the kind of nod people give when someone dies unexpectedly. Another turned and stared hard at her screen, pretending I wasn't there. It's funny how quickly people become allergic to association. I didn't blame them. This company didn't reward loyalty, it punished proximity. At the security desk, they deactivated my badge with a hollow beep. And just like that, Jenna Whitmore no longer existed within Shoreline Systems. But the system I had built? Very much alive, and it didn't need me to breathe. The moment I stepped out into the brutal August heat, it started. I didn't need to pick up the phone. I didn't need to send a single email. Somewhere, a server registered my departure. Somewhere, an automated permissions audit flagged a role as vacant, and somewhere, a dashboard blinked red. Back in 2010, we'd crafted the clause. Me and Aaron from legal, a guy who looked like he'd been born inside a compliance manual. The vendor continuity clause was our protection against chaos. After a Fortune 100 supplier ghosted our procurement team during a leadership shuffle and nearly torpedoed a $3 million pipeline, we built a kill switch, and then we buried it deep. Clause 14.6a. If designated liaison, Jenna Whitmore, is removed without written 30-day notice and without formal replacement named in writing, full contract settlement may be invoiced immediately at supplier's discretion. No loopholes, no bargaining, just math and signatures. The supplier had seen the clause. Hell, they helped draft it. It was a mutual safeguard. The only reason it hadn't been triggered before was because, well, no one had ever been reckless enough to fire me. Until Logan Trent. 3 hours after I left, the first domino fell. An automated compliance check triggered a continuity flag. That flag lit up the supplier's legal dashboard, and by protocol, they escalated. At 3:12 p.m., a system-generated email went out to Shoreline's finance team. Subject line, Final Settlement Invoice, Contract Number 889Q. Attached was a clean PDF, a $250,000 invoice, due in full within 30 days. No discounts, no negotiations, just line items and a digital signature. And the best part? Logan had signed off on that contract himself during last year's renewal. His initials, his compliance stamp, his name, and mine, typed neatly beneath the designated liaison section, underlined in bold, now flagged as removed. There was no wiggle room, no, can we talk about this calls? Just the legal equivalent of a guillotine. Clean, cold, irreversible. They say revenge is best served cold, but this wasn't revenge. This was cause and effect. Push the wrong button, get the wrong result. Microwave metal, get sparks. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't scheme or leak or manipulate. I just left. When the invoice hit their inbox, I was at home. Kitchen table, leftover pad thai, still in the takeout box, wearing sweatpants and watching a rerun of Judge Judy because poetic justice deserves a soundtrack. Somewhere downtown, Logan was probably staring at the invoice like it was a ransom note written in Helvetica bold, because it was. You see, the thing about bureaucracy, it forgets how dangerous silence can be. It assumes silence means submission, that I'd just walk away, sob into a pillow, and disappear. What they didn't understand was that I had already designed the system to outlive me, and it had just come online. The supplier's team didn't hesitate. They followed their checklist like it was the gospel. Trigger alert, verify liaison removal, flag clause, generate invoice, send, done. And while they scrambled to understand what had just landed in their inbox, I refilled my coffee. I could imagine Logan's reaction, the blinking, the denial, the desperate hope that it was a billing error. Maybe someone fat-fingered a decimal. Maybe it was a duplicate. But it wasn't. It was real. And it was his. By the next morning, the entire building was in damage control mode. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't even touched my phone, aside from ordering Thai food and setting an alarm for my favorite courtroom reruns. And yet, the wave was already cresting. Morgan, an old caffeine buddy from the vendor ops bullpen, sent me a text with no punctuation, no emojis, just 5 words. "He's freaking out. It's bad." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I remembered Logan's handwritten directive. Do not contact anyone internally or externally. Fine by me. I wasn't about to break the most expensive rule he'd ever written. But oh, how I savored it. Because I knew exactly what "it's bad" meant. I could see it clearly in my mind. Logan sitting in his ergonomic chair, that $300 tie undone, sweating through his dress shirt, staring at the 6-digit line item on the ledger that no one could explain. One line, one number, $250,000. Zero wiggle room. Clause 14.6a, triggered, binding, immediate. And that was just the beginning. Word started spreading fast, but not officially. No company-wide emails, no farewell messages about Jenna's next chapter. Just silence. A silence so loud it made people nervous. Marketing was already missing a vendor contact. Finance couldn't reconcile a budget line. Legal was getting pulled into emergency huddles. People who hadn't been in a meeting in months were suddenly in vendor exposure reviews and retroactive compliance audits. My name was still in the escalation trees, still listed as top contact in procurement, still admin on 2 of the logistics dashboards. And no one had replaced me, because no one had planned for me to be gone. Logan had ghost-fired me. No transition, no protocol, no handoff. Just a pink slip and a shrug. And now, they were bleeding. The clause wasn't just a contractual formality. It was a live wire, and they'd ripped it out of the wall with bare hands. Morgan texted again. 3 vendors flagged. 2 refused to move forward. 1 escalated to legal. Another message followed 10 minutes later. He snapped at the director in front of everyone. I think he's actually scared. I believed it, because the cracks were showing, and the foundation was buckling. The vendor had already started freezing their service pipeline. That meant no new shipments, no support, no fulfillment. The kind of disruption that could ripple across departments in under a week. And the best part? There was no workaround. The clause wasn't vague. It wasn't interpretive. It was explicit. I was the liaison. Me. My name. And I was gone. By Thursday morning, it had gone from bad to boardroom. The company scheduled a high-priority vendor risk alignment session, a phrase that, in corporate, means get everyone in a room and figure out who's getting sacrificed before the board finds out. The invite list read like a budgetary murder mystery. Every VP, every director, every manager with spending power over $5,000. People dusted off webcams like they were preparing for trial. One of my old colleagues sent a text. We were told to dress like we're testifying before Congress. The invoice, of course, had gone viral internally. Someone had screenshot it. Someone else had printed it out and stuck it on the break room fridge with a magnet shaped like a screaming cat. Rumors were flying. Why weren't we told she left? Who's handling vendor transition? Wait, she's not here anymore? And every time someone asked Logan what happened, he gave the same hand wave. Operation streamlining. Transitions are being handled internally. Except they weren't. From what Morgan told me, she sat through the entire emergency meeting on mute, ears wide open. Logan tried to present the invoice as an unexpected contractual interpretation. His words. He blamed legacy processes and unintended escalations. It was all smoke. Until Darren from legal spoke up, the guy in beige polos who reads contracts like sacred texts. He cleared his throat and calmly dismantled every excuse. Clause 14(6)(a) is clear, he said. The liaison was removed without notice. Per agreement, that triggers the final settlement. Logan tried to say it wasn't intended as punitive. Darren replied, Intent is irrelevant. It's enforceable. It was reapproved last year. You signed it. And then the final blow. The vendor has already initiated service hold pending payment. It wasn't just money. It was operations. Frozen. Stalled. At risk. Someone asked if this was the first time Logan had reviewed the clause. Another demanded to know why there was no transition plan. And then HR chimed in, softly, hesitantly, admitting that they hadn't even known I was terminated until the badge deactivation form came through. Translation. Logan acted alone. No process. No oversight. No one else in that room when he made the call. He fired me like I was a typo in a spreadsheet. And now that spreadsheet was bleeding red. Across town, I was pouring coffee, watching all of this unravel via texts and whispered updates from ex-colleagues who couldn't look away. Logan looked like he had aged 10 years in 1 week. His voice, once smug and clipped, now shook during meetings. The boardroom wasn't asking what went wrong. They were asking why no one saw it coming. That's when the CEO finally spoke. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold. He didn't interrupt. He simply leaned forward, elbows on the conference table, fingers steepled, and said, Who approved this? 4 words. Calm, controlled, but with weight, like a surgeon asking, You do realize what organ you just punctured, yes? The room went dead silent. Logan shifted in his seat, tried to look taller, failed. His face had gone 2 shades lighter than the fluorescent lights. It was an inherited clause, he said, voice shaky. Legacy language from an earlier vendor contract. We didn't anticipate it would ever be activated. Murmurs buzzed faintly around the table, like static, because everyone in that room knew what legacy language actually meant. I didn't read it. The CEO didn't flinch. He tapped the invoice sitting on the table. So you're telling me this, he gestured to the $250,000 PDF, was triggered by a clause you approved without reviewing? Logan opened his mouth, then shut it again. It was previously vetted, he mumbled. By whom? The CEO asked, still quiet, still razor sharp. Logan's eyes flicked toward the GC like a kid looking for the teacher to save him from detention. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. And that's when he made his fatal mistake. He tried to deflect. It predates my tenure, he said, slipping into the oily tone executives use when cornered. This feels more like a procedural gap than an actual oversight. Had the prior team issued a proper transition notice? Who gave the instruction to remove the liaison without notifying the vendor? The CEO cut in. Still soft. Still lethal. Logan didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because there was no one else in that room when he told me I was redundant and scribbled that final line on my termination letter. No one else approved the badge deactivation. No one else blocked comms with internal and external contacts. This was his bullet, his trigger pull, and now, his mess. And sitting in that room were 10 people who smelled blood, and none of them were offering gauze. One of the board members leaned back in his chair, Rolex ticking audibly in the silence. "Rookie move," he muttered. Another added, "This is what happens when you fire your institutional memory without asking what she remembers." Logan shrank in his chair, hands trembling slightly. There were no more PowerPoints to hide behind. No KPIs, no performance dashboards. Just the kind of silence that signals someone's about to be eaten alive. And me? I was in my backyard, feet up, coffee in hand, watching a squirrel assault my bird feeder like it owed him rent. Somewhere across town, the man who erased me with a signature was discovering that ghosts don't need access cards to haunt you. Logan didn't speak again. He didn't argue, didn't try to mount a defense. He reached slowly into the neat leather folder beside him and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Folded twice, worn at the creases. A termination letter. My termination letter. He slid it across the table like a kid handing in a half-finished book report. It landed in front of the CEO with a soft whisper. My name sat halfway down the page. Termination effective immediately. Final instruction. Employee is not to contact any internal or external parties going forward. No one spoke. Not right away. Everyone just stared. The CEO read it slowly, line by line. His face didn't move. But something in the room shifted. Like the walls themselves had just learned a terrible secret. It was all there. The moment, the mistake, the instruction that had tripped a $250,000 landmine, and the man who'd written it? Sitting in front of them, hollow-eyed, praying the paper would defend itself. It didn't, because a termination letter doesn't come with footnotes. It doesn't say, "Here's what I forgot to consider." It just says, "She's gone. Let's move on." But the system I left behind didn't move on. It followed protocol, because that's what I designed it to do. I had built the architecture to withstand chaos, to outlive poor leadership. And it did. When my name was deactivated from the contract, the supplier followed the process to the letter. Trigger alert, confirm clause, send invoice, done. There was no conspiracy, no personal grudge, just logic. Cold, relentless, time-stamped logic. The CEO's voice was quiet when he finally spoke again. "So firing her cost us $250,000? Logan tried to say something about context, about budgets, about offsets and forecasts. But the words didn't land. They just kind of evaporated. Legal cleared his throat. Darren, steady as ever. Clause 14.6a was reapproved last year under his authorization. The vendor acted in accordance with the agreement. The invoice is enforceable. Payment is due in 30 days or the contract will be breached and services suspended. He paused. There is no dispute path available. The air left the room in a collective exhale, not relief. Just the final breath of a meeting that had stopped being about a clause and started being about accountability. Logan didn't say a word. He just sat there, deflated, silent, like someone had popped the illusion of competence, and all that remained was a wrinkled suit and a man who had no idea what he'd triggered. The CEO leaned back in his chair like he was rebalancing the entire power structure in his mind. His eyes moved slowly from the invoice to the termination letter, then from the letter to Logan, and finally to the general counsel. "Did she know?" he asked. The GC shook her head once. "No. Per his directive, there was to be no post-termination communication. Not with her. Not with legal. Not with procurement." Another pause. Another long silence. And that was it. That was the cherry on top. While they sat under fluorescent lighting dissecting the crater Logan had carved into the balance sheet, I was still at home. Same kitchen, same hoodie, same half-warm coffee. Watching reruns of Jeopardy. Eating stale Halloween candy I'd forgotten to give out last year. I hadn't lifted a single finger. No backdoor sabotage, no anonymous tip-offs, no whispered warnings. I followed the order, his order, to the letter. No internal contact, no external contact, no communication. And that silence had detonated a $250,000 consequence. The clause didn't need me to act. It just needed someone else to stop thinking. And Logan had done exactly that. He erased me like I was a line item. But I had become the most expensive entry on the ledger before lunch. Not because I fought back, but because I didn't. And now, every time they looked at that vendor contract, they'd see my name. Bold, centered, underlined. Every time someone reviewed the next procurement cycle, they'd have to double-check clause 14.6a. Every time legal reviewed termination protocol, they'd flag any role with vendor-facing access for continuity checks, and none of it was personal. That's the part no one understood. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't sabotage, it wasn't even anger. It was infrastructure. Designed, deployed, documented. A safety net that didn't care who fell into it. The supplier had executed the clause with the calm precision of a scalpel. Their email had been so clean, so polite, it bordered on performance art. Per clause 14.6a of our active agreement, this is the final settlement invoice triggered by the removal of the designated liaison, Jenna Whitmore, without notice or replacement. Payment due within 30 days. No further discussion anticipated unless non-payment occurs. Thank you for your continued partnership. That last line? Chef's kiss. It practically radiated, "Not our problem." I later heard from someone in finance that they had spent an hour trying to prove the invoice was an error. Duplicate? Mistake? Misrouted? But when they pulled up the contract and reached page 17, there it was, nestled neatly between escalation procedure and payment terms. My clause. My name. My foresight. Darren from legal confirmed it had been re-ratified during the last compliance review. Not only had legal reapproved it, but Logan himself had personally signed off during the renewal cycle. Probably didn't even read it. Probably nodded along while sipping a protein shake and scrolling his inbox. And now that quick scribble was a grenade in his quarterly forecast. The punchline? The clause wasn't even hidden. It had been highlighted during the risk audit. Logan had dismissed it. If it hasn't been triggered in 4 years, it won't be now. Famous last words. Because now it was triggered. And unlike half the tech tools he bragged about during all-hands meetings, this one actually worked. Back at the office, they called another meeting. This one with tighter circles, smaller room, fewer smiles. The phrase post-mortem was tossed around, but not out loud. It was clear they were hunting for a cleanup strategy, something to present to the board that would turn this financial gut punch into a narrative. They tried spinning it as an unfortunate process gap. Someone else called it a compliance oversight. But none of that held water. Because there was paper. There was proof. There was a clear, direct line between the decision to fire me and the penalty it triggered. No ambiguity, no wiggle room. Just ink, timestamps, and logic. And while the execs tried to backpedal, revise policies, and whisper spin the mess into something presentable, I was across town refilling my coffee. Not smiling, not gloating, just existing. Because the truth was, I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I hadn't plotted or schemed or set a trap. I'd just done my job. Thoroughly, quietly, completely. I didn't want a war. I wanted protection. And that clause, my clause, had done exactly what it was designed to do. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. By Friday morning, there were murmurs of a third-party compliance consultant being brought in. Not for routine auditing. No, this was full-on triage. Logan had stopped showing up to floor meetings. His door stayed shut. His calendar showed back-to-back private blocks, which in corporate speak meant figuring out how to survive without a resignation letter. People started talking, not openly, but in kitchen corners and muted Slack threads. Screenshots of the invoice were still floating around. The kind of quiet panic that sets in when people realize leadership isn't as bulletproof as they pretend to be. Procurement was in chaos. Multiple vendors were in limbo. One even pulled their upcoming shipment pending reconfirmation of contractual contact, which is legalese for "we're not risking this happening to us too." I'd built those relationships. I'd memorized renewal cycles, quirks, unspoken rules. I knew which vendor needed a call before the PO, who hated Slack but answered email at 2 a.m., who expected handwritten thank you notes after a big shipment. No handbook could replicate that. No transition memo could replace 15 years of stored, silent knowledge. The real storm hit the following Tuesday. A board-level executive session was called. Not a quarterly strategy meeting. Not a department showcase. A closed-door damage control meeting. From what I heard, courtesy of Morgan and a few others who were quietly leaking updates to me like it was corporate Watergate, Logan had been summoned to walk through his decision-making process, which meant, come explain how you detonated a $250K landmine with your own pen. He brought the termination letter again. Same copy, same creases, like he thought maybe the paper would rewrite itself if he folded it enough times. The board didn't ask for emotion. They asked for names. They asked for timelines. And when Logan tried to frame it all as a miscommunication, someone on the board interrupted and asked, "Who removed the designated liaison without issuing notice?" He paused, stammered, glanced around like maybe someone would jump in and save him. No one did. Because no one else signed the badge deactivation form. No one else scribbled, "Do not contact anyone," onto my termination letter. No one else erased the only name the vendor contract recognized as legitimate, just Logan. And it wasn't a strategic move. It wasn't a restructuring vision. It was ego. He thought I was replaceable, that I was a legacy relic, that experience was a cost, not a value. And now that arrogance had come with a price tag. A non-negotiable one. Someone on the board asked, "Was there no review of existing contracts before the termination?" Logan tried to say there had been, but legal cut in and shut it down immediately. "The clause was reauthorized last fall," Darren said. "It passed legal, procurement, and executive signature, including the CFO." He didn't say it with heat, just cold, factual finality. "We have time-stamped sign-offs in DocuSign, Slack approvals, and an archived PDF with the clause highlighted." Logan tried again. "It was never meant to be punitive," Darren cut him off. "Intent is irrelevant. Enforcement is binding, and the vendor has already suspended service." That was the moment the room turned. You could feel it. The invisible shift when people realize the bleeding can't be patched. The conversation stopped being about what happened. It became about who had to fall for it. And Logan? He was the only name on the paperwork, his signature, his directive, his call. There was no one else to share the blame. Meanwhile, back in my little 2-bedroom rental, I was heating up leftover pizza and binge-watching a baking competition. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to leak a single email. My silence was louder than any exposé. Every time a Slack channel flagged a missing approval, they remembered me. Every time a vendor refused to proceed, they remembered the woman whose name had been removed, not in anger, not in retaliation, but in arrogance. I wasn't the one who pressed the button. I was just the one who installed the fuse box 10 years ago, after watching someone else almost blow it up. That's the thing executives forget. Institutional knowledge doesn't live in Google Docs. It lives in people. And when you delete the people without reading the code they wrote, the systems respond exactly how they were designed to. Logan didn't resign that day, but he would. Not because he wanted to, but because the writing was on the wall, etched in Helvetica, stapled to a $250,000 invoice, and whispered behind every closed door on the executive floor. Within a week, the announcement came. Leadership transition. No details, no farewell post, just a quietly scheduled town hall with the CEO and an HR follow-up that read more like a damage control press release than a goodbye. His name disappeared from the org chart faster than mine did from the email directory. But the clause? Still there, still active, still bearing my name. Morgan messaged me days later. "He's gone. They made it sound mutual, but we all know." Then she added a second message, almost as an afterthought. "They've added new policy around vendor liaison roles. Legal's making everyone reread their contracts now. Yours is the example." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because some wins don't need celebration. Some lessons don't need banners. All I did was my job. I wrote with precision. I structured systems that protected the company from its own chaos. And when I was treated like a relic, discarded with the flick of a pen, those systems didn't get angry. They didn't malfunction. They simply activated. People like Logan believe power is volume, how loud they speak, how confidently they write restructuring into a budget doc. But real power isn't loud. It whispers. It waits. It embeds itself quietly in the terms and conditions no one bothers to read. It sits in a clause reviewed 3 times, ratified twice, and signed with a flourish by someone who never imagined it would turn on him. And when it does, it doesn't shout. It just lands, clean, cold, and without apology. A $250,000 invoice. A frozen supply pipeline. A career quietly buried under one line of overlooked legal language. And me? I was in the backyard again. Same hoodie, same coffee mug. Watching a squirrel go to war with my bird feeder, thinking about absolutely nothing work-related. No LinkedIn rant, no whistleblowing tweet, no viral expose, just silence. Because sometimes the loudest revenge is no revenge at all. Just the sound of consequences doing exactly what they were designed to do.